Hey there everybody, and welcome to DnD Horror Stories with DnD Doge. In today's video, we have a story about a player that likes the Dungeon Master's voice a little too much and gets caught doing things during their D&D sessions. Then we have a story about an RPG that seems to only be a harem simulator, with other themes that just confuse the heck out of me. So before we get into those, I think we're going to need some Simba meditation to help us get through the litany of cringe we are about to embark on. There we go. Now I think we are ready for some D&D horror stories. Player beats off to my voice and gets caught. By Reddit user Dabachi Kaio. Greetings and hello, I am Kaio, a perma GM of many years. I've run God knows how many games at this point, so I have a fair amount of horror stories. But this one is particularly egregious, but I still laugh at it and decided on a whim to type it up while I'm bored at work. Most of the interactions of the problem player could be passed off as playing a particularly horny swashbuckler, and I choose to ignore the mounting red flags because, haha, who the F is going to touch themselves in the middle of a session? Oh my sweet summer child. I am a straight man, and this is somewhat important to the story. And as I preface, I don't care what your particular enjoyment of another human's genitals lean. The setting is a Pathfinder 1st Edition homebrewed campaign where the theme was random adventures and just being guild members and adventuring with a very large open world feel on Roll20. I had 4 players in this particular instance. 3 of them were normal players, nothing really noteworthy about them in terms of this story, though the gnome wizard emotionally hurt me and my gibbering mouthers. The players were a gnome illusionist wizard, a nice dude. He was very creative with his illusions. A human cleric of Sheelan. She was friendly but quiet. Combat was more her thing. A half-orc fighter. He was a pretty normal fighter, and he used a spear and a shield. Then there was Captain Fap. Captain Fap played a male elven swashbuckler, and he professed that he was gay. Session 0 goes quite well. We get the plot and themes, and the players' wants and limits on what they want to see in the campaign. There were no real red flags, aside from Captain saying that he finds my voice attractive. I tell him that I'm flattered, but not interested in using D&D to find relationships, as it's one of my rules. We are here to smash dragonheads in, not fellow players. He seems to take this in grace and understanding. No problems, right? I wish. Session 1. The players are introduced to the bartender, a retired adventurer and an old character of mine living out his dreams and helping new adventurers by filtering them to safer quests, while the more dangerous ones go to more experienced questers. His name was Belcath. I like to start my sessions off by allowing each character to introduce themselves to him while he serves them a drink that gives them a small boost for the next level or session. Magical drinks that cause things like, you feel the sense of righteous might and a sense to pursue justice. Gain a +2 on your attacks. The effects of the drink are based on a d20 roll. Players roll initiative. Gnome gets a potion that made him feel the same elation and wonder of the first time he cast a spell. Fighter gets a potion that made him feel the fear of death grasping at his heart before he steeled himself. Then we get to Captain. Captain gets a drink that reminds him of those feel-good things of summer, whimsy, wonder, etc. To note, the drinks are only alcoholic if the player desires, and unless they roll a nat 1 on Fortitude, I won't make them drunk unless they wish to be. Captain says, "Oh, I do love a big strong orc serving me drinks." He then asks to roll diplomacy to attempt to seduce the orc bartender. I tell him I will allow it, but to give me a perception check first. He rolls the perception check and passes. I tell him, "You see on the orc's hand is a wedding ring," leaving no uncertain terms that he was married. Captain then says, "I roll my diplomacy anyway. I tell the orc, if you keep serving me drinks like this, I might just have to put a ring on you." Now, I allow for players to flirt with my NPCs, or even date them. I just fade to black if things get down and dirty. Belcath, being a man of good humor, replies with a loud laugh that fills the bar. "I'm flattered, kid, but I'm in a committed relationship, and my love of my wife burns hotter than her breath." Now, I make Belcath married for 3 reasons. 1. He is an 18th level fighter, and I do not wish to have a DMPC. I just want to be able to roleplay as my first character. 2. His wife is an elder silver dragon that he impressed when he fought her to a standstill. And 3. It gives me a reason to have a strong spellcaster that can craft any items they need that they would struggle to buy or find normally. Captain says, "Oh, I don't mind being your side piece." I laugh it off and move on. Swashbuckler's gonna swashbuckler. The cleric gets a drink that makes her feel like someone is watching her, giving her a bonus to her perception. The session goes on, and no real issues arise. Session 2. There were no real red flags that I would have noticed during the session. Rather, just things that I see now retroactively. Captain would breathe heavily, occasionally on the mic, passing it off as having to go off and do something, and hurrying to get back. Sure, it's D&D. People from the heavier side of things are fairly common. Captain continues to flirt with random NPCs, teetering that line between SFW flirting and NSFW flirting. We are all adults, so it's whatever. Sessions 3, 4, and 5. Everything continues as usual, except Captain starts muting himself so he doesn't bleed from the mic. He would do this for 4 to 5 minutes at a time, and only once or twice a session. So it makes sense if he is doing running like he said he was. Session 6. The Cluster Effing. It's Session 6, and we are about halfway through a small dungeon crawl, and they are starting to approach the boss of it. After a break, and doing a ready check for players, we begin the boss's monologue. I'm getting into good pace, saying, "Blah blah blah, you'll never defeat me, puny adventurers." But then, we hear it from his mic. A weird noise, like flesh slapping flesh rapidly. The call goes quiet, and the only noise coming through is the slapping flesh and a heavy panting. Gnome says, "What the F?" And I say, Swashbuckler, what the F are you doing?" The swashbuckler quickly mutes himself and started to type in chat, saying that he was slapping his leg out of boredom. Slapping his leg. Right. I am a seasoned GM, and I take no crap from bad players. So, naturally, I banned him from the server, booted him from the game on Roll20, and blocked him personally, as did the other players. I didn't quite know how to continue from there, so we ended the session. The fighter quit the game not long after, no longer wishing to be a part of it, and the campaign died before we hit Session 7. Thanks for reading. I hope you enjoyed my suffering, and unwittingly helping a dude get his rocks off without my knowledge. Well, that was disturbing. I swear, if I had a nickel for every story I've read where a player used a tabletop RPG as an outlet to get their rocks off during playtime, I'd have like 4 nickels, which isn't much, but still disturbing that it happened that many times. Captain Fapp's excuse of slapping his leg out of boredom would have probably been more believable if the party weren't about to fight a BBEG, and if he didn't quickly mute his mic and told the other players that excuse via chat. Then to think of all the times that they heard Captain breathing heavy, and then muting his mic a few times a game, you then realize that he's probably been doing that all along. It is a shame that this was the catalyst for the game falling apart, but it is understandable with that stain being on it, and the game being a reminder of that event. Hopefully, OP was able to Dungeon Master again after this, but this time with players that can keep it in their pants. I think we need a kitty palate cleanser after that story. There we go. That is a bit better. Now let's move on. Dungeon Master runs game for players to collect harems, by Reddit user Tiv the Melancholy. I have a lot of RPG horror stories, but this is the one that I've probably told the most among my own personal group. This was pre-COVID, so a few things may be fuzzy, but this is the gist of what I can recall. The important players are as followed, fake names only. Me, player. Me, obviously. Alan, player. My brother. Sunshine, the Dungeon Master, and source of all of our problems. Melody, player and Sunshine's daughter, 19 years old in case you end up wondering. Second source of all of our problems. Had magic plant agriculture powers, and was also a vampire, I think. Rob, player. Additional source of problems. Had magic crafting powers and an infinite hammer space. Kevin, player. Just kinda there, but he also was part of the problems, to some extent. Super strength powers. Basically the Hulk. A few years ago, Alan invited me to join in a game that his friend was running. At that point, I had played in many of Sunshine's games, and I thought I knew exactly what to expect from her games, but I hadn't played with them in quite some time. The thing to know about Sunshine is that she doesn't like to play any well-established titles when it comes to tabletop RPGs. Years ago, she started making her own system, which she largely came up with after watching Sword Art Online. She loves the concept of being trapped in a video game and being forced to actively practice things in order to get experience and to get skill points. She also loved isekai animes, but is never satisfied with sending us to one single world, and instead will force us through portal after portal from one world to the next as soon as she's bored with the setting. She also constantly changes the rules of her system based on what she thinks is interesting at the time, and would sometimes force us into worlds where all of our skills reset because, quote, the mechanics must be different here, thus making us start over from scratch. This has affected literally every game she's ever run since she's watched SAO. This is made all the worse by the fact that she once was a halfway decent storyteller, but has become so obsessed with her system that she's largely done away with the storytelling part of the game. Well, Alan gave me the pitch for the game. He described a self-insert isekai kind of game, self-inserts also being one of Sunshine's favorite things. We were ourselves forced into a video game where a god would speak to us, give us power that would effectively make us divine rank 0, and then we would go on adventures and become heroes. It's nerdy and a little cringy, but most tabletop RPGs can be a little cringy, especially if you're not willing to at least give them a try. So I agreed to join, mostly because my brother didn't really want to join the game alone, and he needed someone, me, to throw under the bus if he really needed to leave. Well, that is certainly thoughtful of him. I expected this to be a brand new game, or for the only players to have only played a session or two. But when we joined, the rest of the party had already mastered their powers and were proper gods. We also didn't start out meeting the god like we were told we would. Why was all of this? Well, because the other players had already been playing for at least a month by that point, and when they heard, out of game, that we would be joining the game, they thought it would be funny to kill the god that gave them their powers so that we wouldn't start with any powers. Yeah, seriously. More than that, Sunshine made a house rule years ago that drinking a god's blood or eating their true flesh could steal some of their powers. So they basically killed the god and drank its blood, until they were as high in divine rank as their bodies would allow. They justified this by saying, quote, "It's not like we knew in game you were going to show up," and "He was the a-hole who trapped us here, so it makes sense that we would kill him." Still, that is kind of a dick move, with them knowing that your characters wouldn't start off with any powers. I mean, some friends you got there. I was immediately annoyed by this point, but the other players said that they would give us some of the blood eventually, because the corpse of the god apparently never stopped bleeding after they killed it. But they couldn't give it to us at that very moment, because without the blessing of a god, or a deed that proved us worthy, the blood would simply kill us. I pointed out that literally all of them were gods who could totally give us blessings, but they got upset with me and insisted that we would have to worship them for that to work. I said that was BS, but they ignored me and refused to let us get anything in the way of power. As far as power scaling goes, I would say something to the effect of, imagine a first level character going through a dungeon with a level 20 character. But that would imply that we did anything as exciting as combat. Just assume though, literally, every skill check from Alan and I was completely pointless. Yeah, that certainly sounds like a crappy way to start off playing a tabletop RPG. You would think that the Dungeon Master would have something in place for OP and their brother, to not be totally underpowered when compared to the other players. Not that it matters, because it did not take long at all for us to realize what this game was actually about. Maybe 30 minutes into the session, the godly players invited us into their pocket dimension, which was a thing they just had. In the pocket dimension, they had a city that Sunshine said was full of mostly elves. Alan and I were made to do perception checks, and we both realized that literally every elf was a woman and was in some state of pregnancy. Oh man, it's gonna be one of those stories. I asked what the deal was, you know, like a fool, and Rob explained that all of the elves were his wives. According to him, all of the men of their village had been murdered, and the women were taken as, quote, pleasure slaves by goblins. So when the party saved them, many of the women were already pregnant, but that not all, because apparently they all decided they either had to marry or kill themselves, quote, for their own dignity, or some crap like that. So Rob, quote, stepped up and married all of the elven women, and apparently was granted the divine domain of fertility for his, quote, good deed, and could thus forcefully change the parentage of all of the elves' pregnancies. What? And if you think that that's the wildest part of this story, I weep for the both of us. I'm sure you're wondering why I stayed, and I'll be honest. It's because I'm a doormat, and so is my brother, but also because Melody cut in to tell me about the harem she had also collected, and it hit me with such a force that I was genuinely stunned into silence. Melody proceeded to explain that fictional worlds from movies, TV shows, books, anime, video games, you name it, they were all real, and rifts in reality would sometimes open, and they would be pulled into those realities. What she continued to explain was how she met her wife, Harry Potter. Wait, what? This game was already ridiculous. But what? Yes, I'm serious. She then explained the most fanfiction-y BS I've ever heard, of Harry being forced to hide as a boy, even in the wizarding world, because, as she put it, she was cursed, and if she dropped her disguise, literally, every man would be unable to resist assaying her. Yeah, that is... What? She then gave me a list of basically every man in the Harry Potter universe, and explained that they had all apparently already done this to her. Included on the list of characters was Dumbledore, Voldemort, literally all the Weasleys, and multiple members of Harry's own family. The list was much longer, but you get the picture, and I would like to go back to suppressing this information. The party had apparently shown up, learned what was happening, and proceeded to kill literally everyone who had assaulted her. They then somehow uncursed Harry and whisked her away to their pocket dimension, along with multiple other Harry Potter characters, all of whom were also teenage girls, and who were also now members of the various party members' harems. I was stunned into silence for most of the rest of the game, as was my brother. When the game ended, we were too uncomfortable to even talk about it, and we both would have the good sense to just drop out of the game. But the next week, they called us and asked if we were coming, and we were too awkward to say no. Alan really didn't want to go alone. Heck, didn't want to go at all. But we were raised to be people pleasers, whether we like it or not. So we both reluctantly went back. But why though? Even if you have a hard time saying no, after everything that happened in the game so far, if you could call it a game, I think saying no thank you would be pretty easy. I don't remember exactly what happened in all of the sessions that followed, except for one, because it was really weird. Oh, the next one was really weird. Not all the pregnant elves and female Harry Potter stuff? What even is this game? We ended up in the game Stardew Valley, and were recognized as the new farmers in town. We didn't know what the trigger was for how to leave this world, but Sunshine informed us that we had 2 years of downtime, after which the ghost of the farmer's grandfather would show up and judge our farm. She then basically asked us what we wanted to do with our time. I said, F it, you all have magic and I don't have anything. You can all work the farm. I'm gonna go meet people around town. Which, for some reason, seemed to upset them, even though Melody had cleared the farm and had perfect quality crops growing, and Rob had completely upgraded all the houses with his crafting magic in basically the first day. At some point, I decided if they could be cringe bastards and have ever-growing harems, then I could romance one of the characters. I romanced Emily, which Sunshine was thankfully not very descriptive about. In fact, she was never very descriptive about romance in the game, and mostly just said, "Roll me a charisma check," or something like that. It really was like collecting trading cards. Like, the other players never really acknowledged their, quote, wives once they had convinced them to come into the pocket dimension. The other player ended up romancing literally every other woman in town, including the ones that could not normally be romances, which is to say, all the married women in town. By the way, all the dateable people in town that were usually men, they were all women in this world, and also came with us. Also, Kevin discreetly killed Mayor Lewis right before we left because he, quote, disrespected Marnie, who, as you may have guessed, was one of the women he had added to his collection. My brother, you may be pleased to know, did not partake in the romance, and instead spent the entire time fishing and making friends with only two people, Willie and Linus, who he proceeded to adopt and bring into the pocket dimension when we left because, quote, if you can have a bunch of wives, then I can have a couple roommates. It was a very weird session. Right, as compared to all the other ones. This whole story feels like a fever dream. Ultimately, we went to a total of 8 sessions, 3 of which Alan went without the divine gift we were promised at the very beginning, and I went without for almost 6 full sessions. I don't even remember what Alan did exactly to earn his power, but I remember, in the middle of session 6, I texted Alan and told him that if I didn't get a damn divine rank by the end of the session, I wasn't coming back next week. He told me not to worry, and that he was sure it would happen. A bit further into the session, he said he needed a smoke break, and that he would go get pizza, before insisting that Sunshine came with him. And wouldn't you know it, when they got back, Sunshine gave me a scene of me sleepwalking, somehow finding the corpse of the dead god, and hearing the voice of the dead god commanding me to drink its blood. I think it gave me fire and metal powers or something, but it was so underwhelming that it didn't really matter. Well, it seems like the powers didn't really matter in the first place. This whole game just sounds like a harem simulator with no combat. Having a divine rank did not make the game more fun. It just made me realize how much more boring the game really was in hindsight. All we had been doing from the very beginning was just reality hopping and collecting women, many of which Sunshine insisted on giving tragic, assault-filled backstories. Eventually, away from the table, I asked Alan if he was actually having fun in the game, and he looked disgusted by the very question. He admitted that he just wanted to play in one of Sunshine's games again, because they used to be such good friends, and she used to be such a good DM. But ever since she started letting Melody play in her games, they had just gotten weird, and they entirely catered to whatever Melody wanted. Alan ended up telling them that we wouldn't be back, and I'm pretty sure he threw me under the bus to get out of it, but I told him that he could, so it's fine. And the game fizzled out on its own after that. Neither of us have been part of one of Sunshine's games since, and I haven't even seen her or her kid since. I wish there was a moral here, other than don't be a doormat, especially when you're uncomfortable. But good God. Good God indeed. That whole game sounded like a hodgepodge of insanity. With everything that took place, I would hardly call that a tabletop RPG. I mean, the whole thing sounds like something that would come from the mind of Chris Chan. Between the harem of pregnant elves, a cursed female Harry Potter, and gods that you drink the blood of to gain powers, it was just so confusing, and I would have quit multiple times during this game of insanity. I mean, I just got done reading it, and I'm still confused. And like OP said, if there is any moral to the story, don't just stay in a game to make other people happy. If you aren't having fun, you don't owe anybody your time. No D&D is better than bad, whatever the heck this was. Now, I know that I definitely need another dose of Kidium after whatever the heck that was. There we go. Now I feel a little bit better. But that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you, especially if you leave a like and subscribe. I mean, y'all did get 3 doses of kitties today. and may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.